Hello, and thanks for tearing yourselves away from the food and the towers. I didn't expect even this number of people to come along, but welcome. Some of you know from the presentation I did last year, you may remember me from that, and some of you may remember me slightly less fondly from doing one of those PASMA audits that might not have gone quite as well as it should have done. But for those who don't know me at all, I'll briefly introduce myself, because I haven't always worked for the dark side. Yeah. It's a noble calling, but I haven't always worked for that. In fact, my involvement with PASMA goes back to the year it was founded, 1974. At that time, I was working as a product manager for Stevens & Carter, one of the founding members of PASMA. And since then, I've had spells working for Access International. That's a name some of you might remember. Alto Tower Systems, who have got a tower out in the courtyard today, and then running my own company called Active Access Training and Consulting. No longer running, of course, because us pensioners don't do that anymore. Those are the founding members. Access Equipment, John Rustling, Martin Thomas, and Stevens & Carter. Where are they all now? That's another talk in itself. Right. So 4 people in those days. How many members has PASMA got today? Anyone want to guess? Anyone know? I've got the answer down here. It's 3,000 to 4,000, I believe. Is that right? Sounds a lot. Is it 300 to 400? Sorry? Oh, it's 300 to 400. I was getting carried away when I wrote that down. Okay, but my involvement in the access industry goes back even further. And when I was preparing this speech a couple of days ago, I realized it was my 50th anniversary in the industry last week. I joined in 1969 as a naive contract scaffolding trainee to SGB on the princely sum, and I've still got the letter somewhere at home, of £1,049 a year. And I built my first aluminium tower then as part of the product training that went along with that. I won't tell you why I dropped out of the contract scaffolding side of the business, but they were rough boys, and I thought I wasn't suited to that. So, actually, just as an aside, the first Christmas I was attached to a local branch, and the supervisor took the scaffolders out for a Christmas drink, and I'll never forget that the transit van came back and they rolled his unconscious body out of the back of the transit van, and that's when I decided, do you know what, I think I'll go to the lighter side of the industry. Okay, back to the old days. We were still using pounds, shillings and pence, still working in feet and inches, and I know some of you probably still are. Aluminium towers were a novelty product made by a couple of small manufacturers, and PASMA hadn't even been thought of. There were no mobile phones, no faxes. You could only contact overseas by telex. And guess what? And I'm not making this up. The hot political topic of the time was our relationship with Europe and should we have a referendum. That's turned out well, hasn't it? 50 years later, what are we talking about? The same thing. Right, so a lot has changed in the industry since then, and PASMA's played a vital part in that change. So much so that a few years ago it was realised that although we're all aware of what the current standards are, a lot of the changes and why they came about haven't been documented. And those changes and why they changed are obviously been lost as old fogies like me retire and leave the industry. How many of you, for instance, apart from the people who were at the quiz last night, and I could have murdered them for stealing my thunder, know what the PASMA changed its name? Yeah, it was the Prefabricated Aluminium Scaffold Manufacturers Association. So it was a manufacturers' trade association, really wasn't interested in training in those days. But it didn't come up last night, so how many people know what year it was founded? So it started in 74. Any advance on when it changed its name? Even I had to look this one up.
2005.
1999, just before the millennium. So for, was it 25 years? You can see my maths is as good as ever. It went under that name. So, whoops, back one. Okay. So it was decided I think I've missed a page here, never mind. It was decided we should have a physical record of what had been done and what had been achieved. That's not just for a nice-to-have reason. Oh, it is nice to talk about the old days and everything else like that. But we really need to know where we've come from, why we've gone down that route, where we've got to, and then we might have a chance of understanding where we're going to be heading next so that we can avoid some of the errors of the past. And we don't just need the physical sort of evidence, the old paperwork, old photos and things like that, but there's loads of anecdotal stories out there. I've collected one or two from people, and chatting today, for instance, I've come up with, is Jack here, Jack Robbins? Oh, there you are, Jack. Apparently he built his first tower in 1963 in the Savoy Ballroom in Southsea, and guess who were rehearsing downstairs? Some small group, wasn't it?
The Beatles.
Beatles, yeah. So there's an interesting story from the past. And chatting to David here earlier on, he's got a load of photographs of his involvement with Anneka Rice. Yeah. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know if I ought to broadcast them, but you can find it on YouTube. If you're on Challenge Anneka, we did the lighthouse at Haysborough, and we built a structure inside the lighthouse, which was a link tower system. I did it with a designer, a chap called Fred Ullman, and he went off to work for British Standards. Quite a complex job at the time, because obviously with lighthouses, as they go up, they go inwards, but certainly worth a watch if you pick it up on YouTube. Challenge Anneka, Haysborough Lighthouse. But I'm Paul's grandson, and over the course of time we've worked together on in quite a few companies, and obviously passed information between them.
So why haven't you put it in the archive?
Well, I've got to dig the things up, but I'll bring them when you make your next appearance next year.
Okay, right. Okay. But as you can sort of sense, building that record of what we've done and what happened has been far harder than you'd imagine, because PASMA had a very unusual start, actually, and it's never been documented. Some of you may remember me putting that in appeal 3 or 4 years ago. We had a great response from that, but it was sufficient to start the ball rolling, but not really enough to fully document the past. A couple of years ago, we decided to curate all the stuff we'd got, and in true PASMA fashion, we went up to Glasgow, tipped it all on the meeting room table, a nice big mound of it. We put a box for each decade around the side of the room, and we started putting the bits into. Guess how many documents we have for the 1970s? Exactly. We had one document from the 1970s, and that was an old product manual that I'd handed in as part of my collection. So that's when we decided we need to tackle things a bit more systematically and start by writing down what we could remember of the history of PASMA and try and interview and record recollections of members to fill those gaps. As you've gathered from just going around the room today, we've got some interesting things involving the Beatles and Anneka Rice and stories like that that make interesting reading. But why so little information from the early years? PASMA began in 1974 with just 7 members. And even 10 years later, by 1990, or 15 years later, we still only had 7 members. So how did it work in those days? Simple, really. With just 4 companies originally, we used to each nominate someone to represent their company, and we'd go along and sort of just have a meeting between the 4 of us, the 6 of us. My boss went to the first few meetings in '74, then he said, "I'm bored with this, you can go along instead. It's good experience for you, son. Stitched up again." So we had a meeting every few months. We took it in turns to be chairman, secretary and treasurer for a year. So I've got, as Peter said, I've got the dubious honour of having done all those roles in a previous lifetime. We never had an office, so that for the first few years we used to meet in a bedroom at the Excelsior Hotel in Heathrow. We didn't even book a room, we just used somebody's bedroom. usually John Rustling, because he was always flying out to visit the plant in Dublin. And I can remember the first meeting I went to. It was in one of the bedrooms. The bed hadn't been made. There were greasy breakfast plates on the floor, and we sort of had to sit on the edge of the bed and move the dirty cutlery to one side and everything like that. So, it was quite an experience and not very glamorous. None of the members wanted to hold the meetings at their own plants because they didn't trust each other, and they didn't want other companies coming and spying on their operations and things like that. So if you think things are bad between manufacturers these days, nothing like it was in those days. Any outgoing correspondence would be sent via whoever was the secretary at the time. An incoming mail would be sent to a registered post box at the building centre in London. So what brought about the start of PASMA in the first place? It's the Health and Safety at Work Act. So we're into the serious side of it, the legislation now and stuff like that. And the clue's in the date. PASMA was founded in 74, Health and Safety at Work Act came in 74. It was also a time when there was a spate of accidents in the industry. That was the reason this legislation came in. It's almost impossible to imagine it these days, but when I joined the industry, falls from height were running at over 400 a year. Almost incredible these days. And no one was quite sure of the total because they didn't keep the information in the standard format that they did now. My employers that year, for instance, had 2 accidents, a cradle collapse and an aluminium tower falling over that killed 9 people just in the space of a couple of months. I really did wonder at that time if I was working in the right industry. So, this, I've got a blank here. This was also the time that the 5-metre rule came into effect. This required all scaffolds over 5 metres to be built by trained scaffolders. Tower manufacturers, of course, argued that their towers weren't scaffolds. Therefore, they didn't have to be built by scaffolders, as they were simple enough for tradespeople to build on their own. That's a reasonable argument to put forward, but hard to defend if there are a lot of tower fatalities. So another reason why the tower manufacturers got together and looked for ways to improve tower safety. But one of the things that looking back at PASMA's history has taught me is just how fallible my own memory is. Checking memories against old documents has made me realise that sometimes my memory was 5 or 6, some in one occasion 10 years out. We've uploaded the history so far onto the website, but can I have a show of hands around the room who's visited it? Who's looked at the archive? 3, 4, 5. Right, did the rest of you know it's there? Do you know how to access it? Right, okay, I think we need to maybe send some more information about that. There is a link, you can click on it if you're a member and go to the archive. You can see photos of me, you can even see last year's presentation in all its glory, and there's links to loads of photos, a several thousand word history, and probably the most important thing, at the bottom of the link, there's an opportunity to feed in your photos, your thoughts, your history, where you disagree with the history that we've written, any information that you've got. So you might think it's not that important. I mean, it's interesting to hear about Anneka Rice or the Beatles or whatever, but even tiny snippets of information, like the date on an old letter or an old training committee minute or something like that, it all helps to sort of build this jigsaw and fit the picture in, because quite often specific dates are really difficult to remember. So, appeal at this stage, your trade association needs you, and your knowledge, and any snippets that you've got. So, have a look for the archive, find the link, see what's there, have a good laugh, see what you can add to it. Be really much appreciated. So, what have we found by delving back in time? Well, the first act by PASMA to try and improve safety for users was to introduce the Code of Practice. It's gone through many revisions over the years. Anyone guess how many? Has anyone read the current one and seen what version it is? 13. Well done, that man. I had to look it up as well, but I'm impressed. Okay, and it's still going strong. And thanks to generous contributions by people from the archive, we've got pictures of them all now, and we've got originals, including even the first edition. So training courses followed, but believe it or not, they were much slower to catch on. Like I said, it was a manufacturers' trade association in the early days, and people felt that, you know, that was the main driver behind it, not really training. And several years after their introduction of the training courses, I remember we did an annual review of how many courses we'd done, and one of the manufacturers, we couldn't believe it, they'd done a whopping 83 training courses, 83 delegates, not training courses, they'd trained 83 delegates that year. Unbelievable. Couldn't have done that many. There's not that much demand for it out there. So what are we up to this year? Any advance? Any guesses?
70,000.
72,000. Nearly right. Okay, so what came next? Well, early courses were delivered by salespeople, and we'd simply give them a script, give them a slide projector, give them a carousel full of slides, and told them to get on with it. And I used to go along to some of those early courses. I used to give some of them, and some were really good, but some were truly awful. And sometimes to try and liven it up, we'd play tricks. We'd swap the slides around. Or we'd drop in a slide of some scantily dressed young lady or something like that. So when the guy pressed the remote or the advance, something silly would come up. I'm almost waiting for that to happen today, actually, but it was good fun. Then, obviously, we tried to find better ways of doing the training and things that would help out with communications. 1980s came along, and that was the era of the video, particularly the pop music video. So we thought we'd better have one too. I worked on this production, and I think there might be one or two people in the room who did. I think Roger was there as well, lurking. And we thought we'd lost that old one. We tried to show it last year, but it was had a few technical problems. So hopefully this year we can play an extract of it. I've got to thank Peter Bond, who was a stalwart of PASMA for many years, for finding this. He was the sort of driving force behind it, and he'd thrown a copy into the back of his cupboard, and that's what we're going to have a look at in a minute. It runs for about 10 minutes, but I think the whole thing might be too much of a heady mixture for you. It's really, really exciting. But have a look at the first 3 or 4 minutes, spot the duffs that we pinched off EastEnders that was very popular at the time, and have a look for maybe 1 or 2 faces that you might recognise. Okay, thanks.
A mobile aluminium tower. It's a normal part of the scenery on almost any construction site. So normal that many people don't even think about it. An aluminium tower is lightweight, easy to assemble, and easy to use. So easy, in fact, that it's tempting not to read the maker's instructions. But that's a dangerous shortcut to take. Each year, many people die on construction sites because elementary safety rules have been ignored. Even the simplest towers can be wrongly assembled, and site staff must understand how to use them safely and how to deal with potential hazards. In response to that need, the main manufacturers of aluminium towers have joined forces. Together, they have created a single organization with the resources, the skills, and the experience to make aluminium towers to the highest standards of safety, and to pass on safety skills to users in the marketplace. That organization is PASMA, the Prefabricated Aluminium Scaffolding Manufacturers Association. To qualify for membership, a manufacturer must make towers and components that meet the rigorous demands of the relevant British standard BS 1139 Part 3, 1983, and comply with BS 5750. The British standard details the tower's specification and the materials that must be used to make it. It also sets out requirements for load-bearing capacity, lateral stiffness, stability, and so on. To earn the coveted kite mark, the manufacturer must satisfy an independent body that every tower coming off the production line meets the necessary standard. And each manufacturer is subject to random spot checks by British standards inspectors to meet the requirement of BS 5750. But PASMA members don't believe their responsibility ends at the factory gate. They are committed to carrying their own concern with safety onward to the end user. Every PASMA member produces a detailed direction guide and instruction manual. This is supplied to every purchaser and every hirer when their equipment is delivered. PASMA itself has produced an operator's code of practice that covers every aspect of safety on aluminium towers. The present edition ties in closely with Guidance Note GS42 from the Health and Safety Executive. PASMA have worked closely with the HSE on its production. Finally, PASMA sponsors training courses operated by its members. Each one-day course gives full instruction on the proper use of aluminium towers. Site staff are taught erection and dismantling procedures. They learn how to ensure stability in all conditions. They're made aware of potential hazards and how to avoid them. And they're taught all the relevant safety regulations. Successful participants are given a PASMA training certificate. PASMA, setting the standard for safety. There are many potential hazards if towers are not used correctly, so here are a number to be aware of.
Time's running on, so I'll press on with our light-hearted walk through through safety standards and look at the working at height regulations, because that's what drove us from where we were then to where we are now. As you can see, we were just standing up on platforms, plonking frames on. We put ladders in the tower for the video, but we didn't really use them that often. They were just a nuisance and just got in the way of it. But what really drove things and changed things to where we are now is the working at height regulations. It was a long time coming. I don't know if any of you were involved at the time, but it got delayed for several years because there was a big rearguard action by a lot of companies against making it apply to structures below 2 meters. And PASMA played a vital role at that time in pushing for the application at all heights. And PASMA played an even more important role in keeping the tower industry together during that time. Because I think Paul's not in there, because I think there was some very fractious meetings at the time.
One person in particular, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Gary.
Well, we won't name names. Yeah. But PASMA worked very closely with the HSE at that time to develop build methods that everyone could get along with. Even if it was often through gritted teeth, we went along with them. Up until that time, every manufacturer used their own individual build method. And there were, as you see, several manufacturers, and we all had our little variations on how it was done. So PASMA organised a meeting where all the manufacturers came along with their towers, and we demonstrated them all to the HSE, and the HSE made their choice about which methods they wanted us all to go along with. And I well remember a conversation with one of the HSE guys there that day, where I was trying to defend the build method. I was working for Alto at that time. I said, well, look, this is definitely the best method. I think we should just carry on with doing that one. And his answer to that was, if you carry on with that build method, do you want to choose your cell now or later? So I sort of thought, maybe I'll go along with it now. So out of that meeting came PASMA's United Front on 3T and advanced guardrails. I'm sure several of you remember the shock and horror when those two methods came out and we all had to go along with it. PASMA played a really significant role in sorting that out, and I think Peter probably earned his OBE keeping the peace through that period. You know, that was the most fractious time, I think, of the industry went through. And no light-hearted walk through PASMA and safety standards would be complete without reference to low-level access. So I thought I'd play the low-level access training video in full at this point. Only joking, don't worry. What next? as you can see, there's lots of things have changed in the period I've been in the industry. And what's noticeable to me, looking back now, is the pace of change is accelerating. I know it's not lightning fast, but there's a lot of things have changed. There's a lot of changes on the horizon, new legislation and everything else, HD 1004 being updated. And the key to all that is you. So we need to know where we've come from, what the past has shown us, what we've learned from that. It can be very trying at times when new legislation comes in. So to help us build our archive, we need you guys to go through your old cupboards, your old paperwork, old photos, and either go through the high-tech method of attaching it to the link on the website, or just bundle it in the post like I do and send it up to Helen up in Glasgow. And everything will be used, everything will be scrutinised, and every little bit will help. Someone sent in an old minute of the training committee, and from that we were able to work out dates, times, who was on the committee, things like that, because literally we've gotten a record of a lot of these things. And finally, just a slightly more serious note, if you ever feel a bit jaded and disillusioned about what we're doing and training and everything else, think back to where we came from. When PASMA started, we were looking at over 400 plus deaths a year and the accompanying injuries and so on. Now we're down to maybe 40. Still too many, but nowhere near the numbers we used to have. Then do the maths. With 360 lives, 50 years, that's a lot of people. Add the injuries, maybe 10 times that. You're talking about significant improvements in sort of standards, a load of lives saved, a load of injuries prevented. So it's well worth cracking on. So that's my session. Thanks for your attention.